We turn now, as we've been doing on so many of these nights, to experts involved in all of this. Maryland Governor Larry Hogan, who's declared a state of emergency, closed schools, bars, restaurants, activated that state's National Guard. We're also joined by William Hasseltine, an infectious disease expert, a former Harvard professor who's done extensive work on HIV and AIDS and was in Wuhan in the fall, and New York Times columnist Michelle Goldberg, who's been writing that she is already grieving for the way life in New York has already changed. Thanks to everyone. Governor Hogan, what are you telling your constituents, your citizens?
Well, look, this is just an unprecedented, worldwide pandemic that none of us have ever just imagined anything like this could possibly happen. And we've been taking unprecedented actions almost every day. This thing is rapidly changing. Just the pace of things that you just described are things that nobody could possibly think were possible in this country, or in the world. But we've been just taking actions as fast as we possibly can and trying to get the federal, state, and local leaders together with all of the smartest experts and in the medical profession, and we get everybody together on the same page to save, hundreds of thousands of lives in America, and that's really what we're dealing with. I'm the chairman of the National Governors Association. We had our fourth call today with all the governors. We have another one with the president and vice president tomorrow, and everybody at every level of government is on top of trying to do everything possible to ramp up to address this thing, but it's pretty overwhelming.
Governor, take a listen to what one of the fellow governors you mentioned that you work with, Governor Cuomo, recently said.
Today, we are announcing a mandatory statewide requirement that no business can have more than 50% of their workforce report to work outside of their home.
What do you see as the most important measures of that variety, and how much of this needs to be uniform? You mentioned, of course, your role leading the Governors Association. You're talking to the president tomorrow. You're in the thick of this for your state and across the country. How much of it should be synced, and how much of it needs to be tailored to your given situation in each state?
So Governor Cuomo is actually my vice chairman of the NGA, and he was on the call with us today and will be on the call tomorrow. And what's been happening is each governor has been making decisions on their own in their states based on the situation on the ground. But we've also been really sharing information on an ongoing basis back and forth. But yes, some of these decisions could be made and perhaps should be made at the federal level, but we're also not waiting for those decisions. We're taking those actions. We were one of the first states in the country to declare a state of emergency, one of the first ones to close all of the schools. We're one of the first ones to close all the bars and restaurants. Governor Cuomo's action today is really cutting edge. Some of the things you were talking about in California with shelter in place. I mean, this thing, there are numerous actions being taken by governors across the country that are just, people are being aggressive as possible, because every day that we wait, we're putting more people's lives in danger.
Hear you on all of that. Stay with me. I want to bring in Professor Hasseltine here. There are many cliches that get kicked around, and we want to be vigilant and clear, not panicky. But it would seem that this is a time where it is important for people to understand, whether you're watching the news or talking to your friends who don't watch the news, that what you don't know can kill someone, that we are in that place. And I want to play for you, for your expertise on the other side, some of the reporting we've seen in places where, as much as this is being talked about, some of the information clearly hasn't reached everyone. Our reporter, Kerry Sanders, talking to people who were not taking precautions. Take a look.
And are you practicing that rule where you're supposed to stay a significant distance apart?
I'm with them every day. Every day.
I mean, we've been together since forever, and none of us have it. So I don't see why not to be at the beach enjoying life.
Professor, with all due respect to everyone making their own choices, it's still a free country. I ask you in all seriousness, what do you say here with the national megaphone we're handing you tonight to people who think, well, if I'm not seeing it personally, if I'm not seeing it in my life, it feels like, quote unquote, an overreaction. I'm going to go do whatever I want.
No one is immune from this virus. Neither whether you're young, whether you're a millennial, whether you're middle age, or whether you're old. We know that everyone who's exposed can get sick, and in some cases very sick. And even people in their middle age can get sick and die. Look what happened to the young doctor, 33-year-old doctor in China. This is a very serious infection. It causes mild symptoms in many people, But a very large number of people contract serious symptoms, up to 15 and sometimes 20%, enough to send them to hospital and in some cases put them in the ICU. This is not an infection to take lightly.
What did you learn from your time studying and dealing with the situation in China that may be relevant here?
The first thing to say is China is extremely well organized and very disciplined. The other thing to say is Wuhan is a very beautiful city with a very capable research center as well. It's 2 million students or more graduate every year from their universities. It's a very important city for China. But in terms of what I'm in touch with, and I have an operation in China, and many of my friends are from Wuhan and other major cities there, to watch what they're doing is really incredible. They are monitoring each and every person. If you live in an apartment building, they know if you go out. If you go to get food, you'll be stopped 3 times on the way. What's the result? The result is today they're getting back to normal. Singapore, also very well controlled. Today, they're getting back to normal. There's pictures of filled streets in Singapore because they've controlled the infection. This is an infection that can be controlled. But to control the infection, we have to control ourselves.
Well, when you put it like that, of course, everyone's well aware of the differences between our country and some of these other states that have different systems of government, what we might not like in their approach to liberty and human rights, which are very serious things to counterbalance. It sounds like from an infectious disease perspective, you see some upside, and this is a time to be aware of all of the trade-offs. I want you all to stay with me as I turn to Michelle, who, as I mentioned, has been writing about this and the way it's affecting everyone. I want to add something else. NBC's Richard Engel, brand new tonight, was interviewing one of the world's leading scientists, warning us all about what may come next.
How far behind is the United States compared to Italy or other European countries that have seen pretty big outbreaks? We're talking days, weeks?
So I think some areas of the United States are probably a week or 2 behind Italy. Italy was the worst affected European country, the first one. We think transmission started there in mid-January or so. Comparing the United States with countries like Germany and France, I think, again, the United States is bigger, but the worst affected areas of the United States are probably very comparable to what's happening in France, the UK, and elsewhere.
With that applied, your view of understanding what's happening in America, Michelle?
None of this should be a surprise. People have told us that this was coming for weeks or even months. And so there was time to prepare, right? I think that it was inevitable that it was going to hit us. It was not inevitable that it was going to hit us this hard. It was not inevitable that we would have the shortages that we have of ventilators, of ICU beds. And so people are now living in extreme distress. You know, you have not just people who have had their lives upended by illness. You have people whose jobs have been lost. You know, every single empty restaurant is many, many people who won't work again. So a lot of these businesses are never going to come back. Our cities aren't going to look the same when this is all over. And again, we couldn't have been spared. No amount of preparation could have spared us what's going on right now. But if you look at those boys on the beach, you know, on the one hand, they sound very irresponsible, but they also sound like people who might have simply taken what the president was saying a few days ago to heart. If people aren't, you know, if people are only now beginning to wake up to the gravity of this situation, it's at least in part because our political leadership is only now beginning to wake up to the gravity of this situation.
I think that's an important point, and we've been careful to let the evidence lead here. But Governor Hogan, I would give you a chance to address that in all seriousness, not as a quote unquote political observation, but did the president and other leaders make a mistake by saying as recently as 2 to 3 weeks ago that everyone needs to, quote, relax, that this would basically go away by itself seasonally?
Well, yeah, there's no question that was a mistake. And, you know, I think the good news is, you know, I don't think right now, you know, we should all, we can't waste a lot of time finger pointing and talking about what mistakes the president made or anybody made in Washington. Let's talk about what we can do right now. But this discussion is exactly right. So I've been talking about this for more than a month. We declared a state of emergency like 15, 16 days ago. We've had press conferences every day, but nobody was really taking it seriously. And so last Thursday, we put in place this order across the state about limiting the social contact in bars and restaurants and limiting the number of people. Everybody completely ignored it. St. Patrick's Day weekend, they were jam-packed. So then we had to actually shut them all down because people were not paying attention. And now
let's pause on that
because they're watching.
Let me ask you a follow-up on that. Walk us through that, because you are one of the people that has to make these hard calls. So give us a little more color and detail on what you're saying, that you basically were trying to work initially through a more voluntary communications methods, and you felt in your state your own constituents didn't, quote, get it, that you had to get more drastic?
Well, I've had press conferences almost every single day for the past 2 weeks, and I've said things are going to get worse. These numbers are going to ramp up. We've got to start addressing these things. And everybody sort of said, oh, that sounds, that's interesting. And we've taken actions every day. But in the past few days, a lot of people said, oh, this isn't for real. It's no big deal. It wasn't just the president saying that. I mean, there were people on the streets, the kids that were partying in bars didn't think it was a big idea. But now everybody's home watching your show and watching other networks that are saying, oh, my gosh, look at these numbers and look at what's happening in Europe and looking at us closing the border and shutting down, visas and putting shelter in place. And they go, now people are paying attention and it's almost too late. But every day we don't take action is causing more damage. So we've got to, yes, we're behind the 8 ball. Yes, mistakes were made at every level, but let's talk about what we're going to do today and right now and what we can do together at the state and federal and local level, and all of us with the private sector and the smart doctors. Every single American is in this together, and it's not Republicans and Democrats. It's like everyone, and it's the citizens who have to join us in this, because all of us, no matter what we're doing in elective office or what the smart doctors are doing, if the citizens don't pay attention, they're the ones that can stop this from spreading, and they have to be all a part of it. Everybody's in this together.
Well, Governor, I appreciate the point you're making. You mentioned the numbers sinking into people watching. We have on the screen right now some of the numbers approaching 8,000 cases, the Dow down 6%, wiping out years of gains because of the reaction. And then the states, like the state you run, 38 states now with school closures. Michelle, I give you the final word here.
I just think that when you tell people basically to put their lives on lockdown for we don't know how long, 2 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. I'm one of the people whose children are at home, who's been turned very abruptly into a homeschooler with no experience. And nothing could have prepared us for what's happening right now. Nobody who's alive right now has ever experienced anything like this. But there's still no excuse for the extent to which we've all been sort of cast at sea with nobody, but I should say some very competent governors really taking charge of this situation.
Right. No, and I think I hear the whole span of that. That's why these conversations are important. We lose the governor, who is going to be busy. So I appreciate you making time for us on the broadcast. Governor Hogan, Michelle Goldberg.